Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, good whatever time of day it is right now. Thank you for tuning in to the Conversations with Dr. Don show. The show is produced and broadcast from Portland, Oregon, USA. And for your first-time viewers, Conversations with Dr. Don is an ongoing series of one-hour standalone talk shows whereby I interview interesting people like most of you out there about who they are as unique, one-of-a-kind individuals and about what we've decided to talk about this evening. So tonight we're going to talk mostly about Veterans for Peace with Daniel Shea. And the second part of the program will be about Venezuela today, what's been going on down there. And he is so full of stuff about both of those two topics. So we'll spend the second half of the hour talking about both of those, and we need about 3 hours to cover what you're going to be talking about anyhow. Yeah. So how are you feeling right now?
Pretty good. Thank you for inviting me here, and it's always great to be on a alternative TV program that's getting the information out to people, because the media is not always telling us the whole truth.
You're a Trump supporter, I can tell.
Yeah. Yeah, right.
So as you know, the show goes in two major parts. The first part is the bio part, where we talk about who you are, where you came from,
Sure.
all those little unimportant things. And unless people want to know where you're coming from and why it is you have the views you do about the topics that we're talking about, Venezuela, Veterans for Peace, and Venezuela today. So let's go into the bio part.
Sure.
All right. If I were to ask your best friend, who is Daniel, what would your best friend say? Be your best friend. Daniel is?
Well, he's a loner. No, he's. Well, Dan has always been one of those people who has been politically active, not always speaking as a veteran. You know, a good friend would have said we went to high school together. You know. Dan wasn't doing so good in high school, you know. He had to drop out. He dropped out, but he went and got his GED diploma.
Me too.
Yeah, before his class. He graduated before his class. Working class guy, always union background, you know, just got into the union, his first job, and his close friend also has a union father, union jobs, and myself, you know, later as I was, you know, getting into the working field, I became a union shop steward, and later became elected to the executive committee of my local union, which I was in the printing industry. So that was Printing Pressmen's 43, which is part of the international GCIU, the Graphics Communications Union.
Were you a socialist?
Well, you know, how do they define a socialist? If you mean, do I care about human beings? Do I care about health care for all? Do I care about workers' rights? Well, if that's what it means, then yes, you know, I'm a socialist. I'm a communist. I'm all of those
That was my
things.
next question.
In fact, I've been called all those things.
Yeah, do any of them fit?
Yeah.
You bet. Now, when and where were you born?
I was born here in Portland. I was Portland. I'm born and raised Portlander. We grew up in. My dad was my dad was actually born in Panama, and as were my aunts and uncles, except for one, the youngest. But you know, my grandfather went to work on the Panama Canal. He was in his 50s. He met my grandmother, who was in her 20s, and married her.
Were they all Americans?
Well, she's not American. She was actually of the indigenous Spanish Panamanian, and so they are both. You know, we are both. I mean, my grandmother spoke English, but very broken English. She's very more fluent in Spanish. The kids, none of them learned Spanish, or if they did, they forgot it, because, you know, you come to America. They came when they were in middle school and then high school, and they you speak American. You know, this is what it was, and you were penalized for speaking another language. You know, so I often, you know, identify with my Latino side, which gives me the interest in Central America and Latin America.
Of course.
But the Irish side also is important. My study, my grandfather, I think, became a businessman. He ran his own construction company, helped build part of the street. His name was in the streets in Oregon City. But my dad grew up, he was a bartender, raising 6 kids in a 2-bedroom house off about 84th and Duke, which is in the Lentz district, you know, which is still having its problems and people in rent, and it was a time we you know, as kids, everybody had 3 to 4 to 5 kids.
This is in Portland's east side.
Yeah. And so I mean, I never felt lonely. We could have a baseball team just by ourselves, you know, a couple of neighbors, and that was it. But it was also a tough neighborhood, you know, predominantly white neighborhood.
Yeah.
Working class, poor. Derogatory term for the area was felony flats.
Felony flats, I like that.
Yeah. And but you know, there was a family down the street that was Native American, and I used to go play with Junior, who is his mother, Dolores Montasioca. She was actually a Canida princess, and I've seen her many times over the years. She's was very active in Native American issues. Then there was one black family just on the opposite corner.
Little token, huh?
Yeah, they were there. I used to stop by there all the time and talk with the gentleman. To me, they were, you know, they might have been 20 or 30, but they were old people to me. You know. I must have been 10 years old or so, maybe a little younger. And I dropped by there and just talk with the guy there, because he had a couple of dogs, and they always had a garden growing. And neighbors right across the street yelled at me, "You N lover." Oh man, and you know, I can't say I never heard the N word before, because television had it, you know.
Sure, yeah.
But I never felt the hate before. I never understood, you know, didn't.
It's out of the blue, huh?
Yeah, out of the blue. So I go home and talk with my mom. I said, "What's this N word mean?" She about slapped me and says, "Go wash your mouth out with soap. You don't ever use that word in this house. You know your grandmother's Panamanian, and you may have black blood in you, and that you may have a child that when you grow up that has is African. You know, that's going to show. You know, you're not going to know that." So I always thought, I'm a person of color. So I was always fighting racism. I was always fighting racism after that. You know, I mean, racism was something I could not stand. I could not understand how people could hate other people. So that's kind of something that was inbred in me. It was something that I always felt. Now, my brother had darker skin. I also learned white privilege. White privilege meaning he got in trouble, I got in trouble. I got off, he got in trouble. You know, just the way it is, and you begin to see these things over time.
Brothers and sisters?
Yeah, so I had 2 brothers and 3 sisters.
Why were you born?
Why was I born?
Everybody always asks you that question back.
Well, I sometimes say, well, why am I here? You know, like so many philosophers.
Sure.
What's our purpose in life? It's hard to say. I used to be a religious person, growing up Catholic, later became Jewish. You know? I studied a lot of different religions.
All over the place.
Yeah. So I was searching, you know, but I would say I'm more of an agnostic. I'm more a person who thinks, I don't know what's really there. I don't know if there is or there isn't. Do I really care? If I'm doing good in the world, if there is a God up there, then what the heck does he care what religion you are, you know?
How come are you doing good nowadays?
I try to do good. I'm never perfect. Who's perfect, you know?
Yeah, yeah.
But I'm not going around and separating children from their parents on the border. I'm not a Nazi walking down the street with torches, running over some poor girl like Heather Heyer in North Carolina, you know. I'm just not going to, those are the things, if you're going to send anybody a punishment scale, I think those people need to be sent down to whatever that place I used to call hell. You know. But whatever, you know.
Perhaps we'll touch on what's going to be happening.
Yeah,
to Trump in the
yeah.
next
But, you
couple
know, I mean, we're all living in a world that we have to, I see fascism growing in this country.
Yeah.
It's going all across Europe and across
Yes.
the United States. And we're having people like the Proud Boys and other groups coming even into Portland, beating up people for no reason at all, other than that they're either trying to show they're tough or attacking them because they're a person of color, or they're standing up as protesters. Whatever the case may be, we've got these people going around who are basically terrorists in this country. So, you know, how does that happen? I thought we had moved past that some time ago. Well, you know, for people of color, it's never been gone past.
Well, then how does that happen? You asked the
Yeah.
question, how does what you're talking about now happen?
Well, that was a big question. It was, I was telling you earlier that I was watching this video interview with Glenn Greenwald and
One of my heroes.
Yeah, and the former president Lula, who is in prison. right now.
Lula.
And so Lula is, you know, he was asked that same question. Now, how did this happen? Is it the failure of the left? Is it the failure, or is it neoliberalism that was a combination, a compromise with the right and the left? Is that what happened? And Lula, I loved his answer. He says, no, it was our success. It was our success to create a social program where we had Social Security, where people couldn't read. We raised their literacy rate up so that people could go. We created avenues for people who would never had a chance to go to college or some technical school. They raised the poor up 3 to 4 times higher than they were before. Well, the rich, of course, they still rose too, but they didn't rise in such proportion. So they're angry. He says, well, why, if they're a success, if they're gaining money and that things are working for them, why do they care?
They
He
never
says,
get enough.
Well, they never get enough, but he says, you know, they have this history of racism that's embedded in people, and they don't like to see the lower classes rise up, whether they're black, brown, Indian, or whatever, and just even the poor. They don't deserve to be in the positions of power that they've always been in.
You're following an organization that is too far out. I mean, peace.
Peace.
Because if you have peace, then you won't have those kinds of difficulties we're talking about right now.
Yeah, that would be nice, wouldn't it? You know, and so as I'm growing up, you know, like I said, I dropped out of high school and I went to. I was in a hard labor job. It was a good job. It was like I was working for a company called Air Filter Sales and Service, and at that time, you know, they had these filters that are about so thick, about 4 inches long and about this wide, tall, square,
Yeah.
and then you would drop, and they were all wire mesh, and you would drop them into this oil. So they just drop tons of them into this oil. Then we stack these things up on trucks, and we would go to, you know, sometimes we drive all the way up to Seattle, Longview, down south, Eugene. We would replace filters. So we get up like 4 or 5 in the morning, stack the trucks, head out, and sometimes spend the night over there so that we could change the filters in paper mills and high schools and businesses, and for their heating and air conditioning. Well, this was. Sometimes we'd have to throw something clear up. So we would be throwing these things up 10, 15 feet up to a guy that was up there already on a rail. He would catch them, and he'd take the old ones out and drop them down. We'd catch them. I mean, you couldn't believe, you become very strong doing this stuff. You couldn't believe we could do that. carrying these things, walking almost a half a mile. And a good union job, good pay, you know, for a starting job. But what was going to be? What was the future in that? You know, was I going to do that the rest of my life? And somewhere I just thought, you know.
Did you decide to get some more education? What?
Yeah, I wanted education. Now the draft was on you know, it was there. I was 19 years old, and the draft was licking at my heels basically, and I just decided, let's get it over with. I didn't know. I couldn't told you where Vietnam was. I couldn't told you the language, the you know, the culture. I had no knowledge about what was really this is all about. All I knew is I wanted to get it over with, and I tried getting into the Air Force and all these other places first. You know, GED don't get you in there. So the Marine Corps was
my
about
life again.
Yeah, so the Marine Corps comes by and says, "We'll take you." You know, they needed bodies, and so I joined the Marine Corps. My brother joined right after me. He heard I did, so he jumped on the bandwagon. We both end up in boot camp together. And the minute I got there, I realized, boy, this is a big mistake.
Too late.
Yeah, but you know how everybody's seen the TV programs where they break you down, they call you names. That's pretty regular in the military, especially the Marine Corps, and they break you down. There's almost
So
this.
that's just obedient, blind.
Yeah, yeah. But it's like hazing. You know, it's like this. There's something cruel about it. It's not. They say they're doing it so you're ready for the. If you're in a tough situation, you can be tough and come out of it. Well, I don't buy that. I think that's just a.
Is it still going on that way in their basic training?
Yeah, it's still going on because we just had some reports of people that were going through this kind of stuff. You know, these things happen. Even there's reports people that were in Afghanistan who were, you know, they have small units on a mountain, but a new guy comes in the place, they almost beat him up.
Oh yeah.
And to become a part of the team, you had to go through this sort of gauntlet of the guys beating the hell out of you. Then you're okay, you know. Then you're one of them. What's that? It's some stupid macho game that they got.
How long were you in Vietnam?
Now I was only in Vietnam a couple of months, so that has to tell. You know, I mean, you can be there one day and be dead. But what happened to me is, I had actually gone AWOL before I went to Vietnam, and when I went AWOL, it was me and this other guy had been out. You know, we were just getting ready to go to Vietnam, and they gave us liberty. We went out, drank too much, and we said, hey, we're already late. You know, if you're even a few minutes late, you're AWL, absent without leave, and you can be reprimanded. We said, if we're going to get in trouble, why not just go home and say goodbye to everybody? You know, we don't know whether they're going to live or die, right?
Yeah.
So we just decided we'd take a little bit extra leave. And about 4 days later, our parents get a call saying they better get their butts back over here. So we turned ourselves in, hopped a flight with the Air National Guard, got in there. As soon as we got in to Camp Pendleton, where we're down there.
Yeah, yeah.
A couple of chasers came and grabbed us, you know, and were taking us to what they call a captain's mast, which is kind of a mini court-martial. So with that, you know, this one guy who was taking us in, they're both lance corporals, so there's like E3. They, you know, no big authority, but this one guy's giving us all this kind of crap, saying, you know, that he was just treating us like we were dirt, like we were some kind of traitor or something. And this guy, other chaser, whispers to us, don't piss him off. He killed a guy last week. What? What do you mean he killed him? How he did that, I don't know. Pushed the guy so far the guy did something or ran or whatever. So, you know, we're kind of scared. We don't know what's going on. So we get to the captain's mast. This one lance corporal goes into the captain, and, you know, he actually stood up for us and he got the other guy kicked off our team. He must have been busted too, because he just took him off because he was treating us inappropriately, and so the so the captain, we come in there, but he didn't like the whole idea that this caused all these problems. So he said, you know, we were running people to Canada. We were part of this underground movement. Well, I wish the hell I was, you know. I didn't know anything about it.
What year was this?
This is 1968.
68, yeah, oh yeah.
Yeah. And when you think of 1968, what do you think about? I mean, there's a lot of things. There were, you know, there was revolution going on all across the country. There were black uprisings, Chicano uprisings, you know, people, a feminist movement, all the, and the anti-war movement beginning and stuff. So you had all these different things. I hadn't a clue. I had no knowledge about it.
You were just green as the grass.
Yeah. So, you know, we end up being, they docked us a month's pay, busted us back down to E1. We were only E2, E1, and then threw us in the brig for 30 days.
30 days.
Yeah, but you know, the brig was nothing to me. It was just like boot camp in a sense. Only a few more doors would lock, you know, and slam behind you. But then a chaplain came and said, "You guys want to get out of here early? If you sign this paper, this waiver to go to Vietnam, we'll let you out a week early." So we signed it. We figured we're going anyhow. And they shipped it off to Vietnam. I come into Vietnam first day, just the two of us, come into Da Nang Airport, air base there, and the minute we got off the plane, incoming came in, you know, just these mortar rounds came in. Everybody scattered, and we're standing there like with our heads up in the air, trying to figure out what, like a couple of hicks, I didn't know where they're going, and just going back and forth. I thought at that moment I was going to die. I was,
really?
Yeah. You know, that's real fear. You know, you have these things coming in. I mean, luck wasn't going my way. I'd gone AWOL. I'd gone to the brig. I ended up in Vietnam. You know, life wasn't going in the direction I thought it was going to go. so I thought, oh, now. If there's an old man up there, he's or old woman or whatever, they've already marked me down and said, "Hey, let's get rid of this guy." You know? So I thought it was over, but somebody whistled for us. We went into a bunker and we were fine. So come out of that and end up. This sergeant comes to pick us up, and he takes one guy one way. I mean, the guy that came with me had to go one way, and another. He picked me up, and then there was this guy who had just come off R&R, you know. He had been mini vacation from the field, and I asked him what his name was. He said, "Just call me Chief." He was Native American, so we called Chief, and I take off with this sergeant in a Jeep, heading to whatever our base camp is going to be, which I believe was in Quang Tri province. Well, it was in Quang Tri province. So we get in the Jeep, and then a typhoon hits.
Oh man, you're just born lucky, that's all.
Yeah. Typhoon hits, and the Jeep can't make it through the mud with all of us on it, so he drops us off at an air base, which was like a little medevac helicopter area, and just a room for 3 or 4 people. So we spent, I think, 2 or 3, maybe 4 days there until the storm blew over. And then the helicopter took us to a pad. They dropped us off there. Then the sergeant came back in a Jeep, picked us up, and took us to our base camp. So, I mean, that's just the beginning, right? And I'm a machine gunner. So we had this other guy who came in about the same time. He was a machine gunner. They want to put us to a test, so they have us, you know, taking turns to firing at targets, and we're both expert shots. So, but I ended up being the expert, which really it's your A gunner that's probably better, because they're the one that directs your shots. So he was better at directing me than I was directing him. So, but I ended up being the machine gunner, and you know, we go out and we guard Hai Van Pass, which is along the mountains, and as from where we were to Da Nang and on, this road would be, you know, people would be traveling all day long. you see caravans of Army and military and, Vietnamese going back and forth through that. But at night we would shut it down so nobody could come through, and we guard that pass. And I'd set my machine gun up on a turret and just wait. And I remember, again, incoming came in, dropped out behind us, and I saw the flash just across the street, this road into the jungle. So I knew where it came from. And I'm talking to my guys, and I said, my squad leader, I says, "Hey, do I fire in here?" He says, "No." He says, "Where did that land?" I said, "Behind us." He says, "Because they don't know where we are. The minute you fire that weapon, they're going to see you." Yep. And so he says, "We don't do anything. Nothing happened the rest of the night, But those are and then they told me, they said, "Dan, we're not here for all that patriotism stuff that they're talking about, for the flag and ma and pa and apple pie and all that kind of stuff. We're right now trying to survive. The Vietnamese are trying to survive. People, we shoot. If we shoot somebody, it's mainly because the guys on top are telling us we have to shoot. But we're shooting to save our lives. We're firing. Somebody fires at us, we fire back. That's the only reason. Forget all that other stuff. Now it's survival."
Yeah.
So already, there's something planted in your mind that, this is, what are we there for? There was nothing about, this is the interest for the United States, the domino theory that was told to so many people in America. That didn't mean anything to any of us. And there were many things that were going on at this time, still unaware of it. But, years later, I learned about the GI resistance movement, which was incredible thing that was happening.
You had the first inkling about that was a possibility for you.
Yeah, this is just something that, you happen. And then on an operation that I was on, which was a search and destroy mission. This is one of my last ones. So I was on the search and destroy mission. Our whole platoon was, dropped off in the middle of a field with helicopters. We jump out of the helicopter. We go in, and many things happened along the way. But we ended up, humping this mountain, and we're running out of food and water. I forget how many days we were out there. And we were humping this mountain, and I remember feeling, exhausted. Probably heat stroke was probably starting to happen. And I asked my sergeant if he would, if we could stop, my squad leader. Said, "No, we got to keep going." And I couldn't. And I just said, "I'm not gonna." And I picked up my machine gun and threw it down the hill. And the lieutenant comes down, running down, grabs me, throws me down the hill. So I go and pick up the machine gun and start cleaning it a little bit. But that moment of just stopping that little bit caught my breath. Somebody gave me a little sip of water. We made it up to a plateau. And on this plateau, jungle all around, but just like this circular theater. As you're looking out into the field, you see these rice paddies in this little village off to the side, or little farm. And we're supposed to go down there, and that's supposed to be search and destroy, right? We see this caravan going across, and then we hear a firefight. You can see people shooting back and forth. And we call over and say, what's happening? They say, "Don't worry about it. It's the black market trying to get drugs that we're delivering."
So you were only a couple of months in Vietnam. All this happened so very fast, huh?
That's happening, yeah.
How long did this kind of thing go on before you finally got out of there?
Well, what's important to know is that, not only did I say no, when we got to that plateau, they were telling us we had to continue, right? We all refused.
Wow.
There was a mutiny in the field. So, we gave the middle finger salute to the officers. They sent that sergeant that picked me up, sent him to go down this path. The jungle bushes, foliage closes up around him. We hear an explosion. He stepped on a mine and killed him. So now they couldn't get us to go anywhere. He finally gave up and called. Some colonel came in on a helicopter, gave us this rah-rah speech that we're supposed to go down. Everybody gave him the middle finger salute, and I said they weren't going anywhere. And he gave up. He just realized morale was bad. People were sick and tired of this. So he called in hot food on helicopters came in hot food and beer and cigarettes for us. And it's where some of us are exchanging cigarettes for beer and vice versa, and they're taking that sergeant's body out in a body bag in the same helicopters. And it just stays in my mind. Then the next day, we have to go down. This Phantom jet was going by laying napalm over this village, and when it, I thought it was going to crash, and it did. It crashed. We found out the pilot bailed out. It wasn't shot down. He was something got stuck in his gears. He bailed out in time. Said he was fine. He'd wait for us to come down. So now we have to get down there. Now I can't remember how we got down there. I don't remember ever going down any path like that sergeant. We either walked down straight down. I remember walking through the rice paddies, and as I'm walking through the rice paddies, these other guys are walking along the dikes above the water, and I'd hear an explosion, a scream, an explosion, a scream, an explosion, just one right after the other. And then I get onto dry land, I see a tripwire, step over the tripwire, see a punji pit. My A gunner steps in the punji pit, which is usually a mine underneath it. Mm-hmm. And I thought I was going to die, but nothing happened. And
in the interest of time, we're going to have to bring this part of our discussion.
Sure.
So when did you get removed from that situation?
Well, what's important about this is that I was telling this story to people before, right?
Yes.
And what happened is I can't remember anything that happened the minute I stepped past that point where we stepped over the mines.
Yeah.
And I was telling that to people. I was proud I'd never fired my weapon at anybody. Mm-hmm. And then my body started shaking, and I started crying, and I could barely hold myself up.
PTSD.
The horrible thought was that we went in and massacred those people. So I don't know if that's true. I only know I may be the trauma of the people that died while I was there.
Yes.
Or it was something that happened that my mind cannot tell me what happened from that. It's protecting me from that. I go to therapy once a month.
Even now?
Even now.
Oh, for gosh.
Because of that.
So this is why you are against war.
That's right. That's right. That's what brings me to this. And then when I come home, I have Agent Orange hits. My firstborn child is born with congenital heart disease, cleft palate, other abnormalities.
Agent Orange too. Oh, yeah. Man.
So then you have, when he's 3 years old, he has to go for surgery. And when he goes for surgery, he was 3 years old, 1981, February 25th, 1981, is the last day. He was going to surgery, and I tried to stop it because I just had this terrible premonition. But I was convinced by therapists and other people that said they needed to do this, and something happened, and it was an oxygen shock to the brain. He was in a coma for 7 weeks, and my wife and I were at his side every day. And I did have a daughter just a year younger, and he was put in my arms and took it as a deep breath, sighed it out, and that was his last breath, and died in my arms.
Oh, man.
The whole ground underneath me disappeared. Everything was gone. All this led to, eventually, my grief. I realized the grief of all those Vietnamese women and children and fathers that lost their family members, their children being born with all these birth defects from our time there. We killed over 4 to 6 million Vietnamese and exposed over 4 million to Agent Orange. And so those are the things that I just decided I could no longer participate in war. And I didn't really speak out against war as a veteran until 1991, when the first Gulf War with George Herbert Walker Bush, started bombing
Cambodia.
Yeah, well, Herbert Walker Bush in 1991 was the Persian Gulf War.
Oh yes, yeah.
Yeah, and he was stopping the Iraq into going into Kuwait. And but bombs were dropping, and I remember, you know, I was at Portland State. We'd gone back to college, and somebody pulled the alarm at the college. People came out, and they were all complaining about it. And I said, "Don't you realize that they're killing people right now?" And then I wrote something as a veteran in the school paper, and people really responded to it. And I realized I had to speak out as a veteran because I had seen war. I had seen what it done to my family, and I know what it does to people all over the world. And that, you know, here people just, it's a statistic.
So you've been speaking out ever since?
Been speaking out ever since.
Yeah. So you got some more education.
Yeah.
How much?
Well, I did my, you know, I went back. I did at first use my GI Bill to just go to community college for a while. Then got into the printing industry, like I was saying, labor background. And then in a big labor dispute, which I lost my job, was injured, I just decided to go back to college. And I basically started over at Portland State University in 1989 and went on for 10 years. I went and did my undergraduate. I did a post-bac in international studies in Latin America, and then I dropped out of that and finished my degree. I got a minor in international economics and a MFA in fine arts. So. Yeah, I wanted to learn everything. I took everything I could, you know, and I'm still paying my student loans, you know.
Yeah. Memberships in political or social organizations or civic organizations. How many of those do you belong to?
Well,
memberships.
Well, really, right now, not too many. I'm with Veterans for Peace, of course.
Yes.
With Veterans for Peace, I'm on a number of committees. I've also just recently joined DSA, Democratic Socialist Portland,
yeah.
you know, and they have a Veterans Caucus, which I'm really interested in. Plus, they have a Labor Caucus, which I've been to one of their meetings. So,
are you some kind of a do-gooder?
Yeah,
convicted
yeah.
there? Okay, what's right with America today? What's right with America? Then I'm going to ask you what's wrong with America.
Well, what's right with America is people that are standing up. You know, when I see young people standing in the streets speaking out against these atrocious conditions that are affecting immigrants, which I said before, you know, it's another thing that's connected to militarism too. This idea of militarizing the border.
Yeah.
But you know, when we see individual people speaking out and stepping up, whether it's racism, human rights issues, gay and lesbian situation, there's numerous groups to get involved, and the environmental issue. I mean, we better get our heads together if we're talking about climate change. We're headed towards extinction if we don't do anything about it. So to me, it seems like we have to all come together, or Mother Nature is going to take care of that question for us.
So it seems like you're touching on what's wrong with America too.
Yeah.
So it's about time to take a few minutes break anyhow, so we can come back and talk about the topics.
Sure.
Okay, let's take a break there for a few minutes. Okay, we're back. Thanks for staying tuned. And for you viewers who missed the opening of the show, Conversations with Dr. Don is an ongoing series of one-hour standalone talk shows where I interview interesting people like most of you out there about who they are as unique, one-of-a-kind individuals and about whatever it is we have decided to talk about tonight. And in our last few minutes, we're going to be talking about Veterans for Peace and what's going on in Venezuela today. And I'm bumbling on my words here. So let's talk about Veterans for Peace. And I had this one blurb that really turned me on. It's a long verb, but I'm going to read it out loud,
Sure,
okay? Veterans for Peace is an organization founded in 1985.
Right.
It was initially made up of U.S. military veterans of World War II, the Korean War, the Vietnam War, the Gulf War, and other conflicts, as well as peacetime veterans and non-veterans, but has since spread overseas and has a very active offshoot in the United Kingdom, which has effectively replaced the former ex-services CND organization. The group works to promote alternatives to war. You work to produce alternatives to war. I want to hear about those. The organization has opposed the military policies of the United States, NATO, and Israel, and has opposed military actions and threats to Russia, Iraq, Afghanistan, Iran, Libya, and Syria. You got a plate full of things there, huh?
We do. I mean, that's why, you need a large organization. Some people take on this thing, some people take on that. And this year, actually, we're going to have our convention in August 15th over the weekend in Spokane, Washington. And it's going to be interesting. But, one thing about when you were talking about the UK as one of our chapters, I was on the board when we were pushing for I was on the National Board of Veterans for Peace, which is usually a 3-year term. I was on back in, I think, 2011 for a couple of years, because I was appointed and somebody came off. Then I ran, and I just finished up a 3-year term here in this last year in 2018. So from the last 3 years, I was on the board promoting, from way back in 2011, promoting the idea of international chapters, mainly reaching out to people, I and others, were reaching out to people we knew who had been in war in different countries and victims of war. And since I'd seen things from like breaking the silence from Israel, where people who were serving were speaking out, I was saying, well, what about Africa? What about this country? What about that country? We just started thinking about those ideas, and then, we had a chapter in Vietnam. Our Vietnam veterans had been there for many years, almost right after. But then the UK says their people out of the Iraq-Afghan war said they wanted to be a chapter. So we had to decide, is that something that we could deal with on an international basis? And we said, they're sort of autonomous in a sense, but we all under the same umbrella.
How do you all get your funding?
By people donating, it's all donated, it's all volunteer work. We do have a staff, a national staff that puts things out, but all of it's been through donations. And so that's one way, dues and donations. And chapters, like my local chapter, we don't pay dues to our local chapter. We only pay to the national, which for a full member is like $40 a year. Not much. Cool. But when we come together, we'll pass the hat and raise money in our local chapter, and do events, then bring people, speakers and stuff in to talk about the various issues. But on an international level, not only that, we have delegations going to various places. So in December 2015, I was on a delegation to Jeju Island, and
That's in China Sea?
that Jeju Island is right there off it's a province of South Korea.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, so the Koreans, at the behest of the U.S., were building a deep water naval base there. The people there have been protesting for 8 years to stop the construction of it, every day being in front of this construction site. And this is sacred land to them. This is not just, this water is pristine, the rocks are precious, this is indigenous people's spiritual land.
So indigenous peoples worldwide are being...
Yeah. And so even while we were there, I learned more of the history of that nation. Then we also, after we finished there, we went to Okinawa. Same thing. People in Okinawa were protesting the bases. So what we did is we actually joined them in their demonstrations. the police would actually pick us up and move us out of the way. We would stop construction, which would cost them money and time. People had been arrested. There had been many things. But we learned, both these islands declared themselves islands of peace. They both created, instead of war monuments, they created peace monuments, peace museums, which is, keeps me thinking about peace. You talk about how do we change things. They declared their islands islands of peace. They want these bases gone because they don't want to be the stepping stones for war. In the end of the Korean War, there was a massacre that took place on Jeju Island called the April 3rd Massacre. And their whole history is based on that. And now they have this whole museum that tells the whole story of how that happened. And then in Okinawa, I learned about the Battle of Okinawa, World War II. The Okinawans are caught in between the Japanese and the Americans. And they've been protesting also for 8 years, trying to stop this base, this Marine Corps air base that's going to be created called Hanoko.
What keeps you going? Seems like there's a history of war forever since humans have been occupying this planet. What keeps you going?
Well, it's things, seeing those people actually gave me, a lot of hope because they continue to fight. Their governor actually took the construction license away from them to build the base. Then the Japanese government sued him and put it back. He sued them and took it away again. And then he passed away. New governor was elected. He did the same thing. He took it away. They went ahead and put it back. So there's a continuous fight going back and forth. And the people continue to fight. But, you're fighting both Japan and the U.S. on this base. It's a Marine Corps base. And,
But it's still Japanese territory.
It's Japanese territory with some autonomy for the Okinawa. It's a very weird situation.
But I want us to pause for just a couple of minutes ago, again, to talk about Venezuela today. That's so critically important. We should have another half an hour for it.
Yeah.
What about your Venezuela experience? What is that?
Well, that's again became another delegation, right? We've had people go to Palestine, various places.
Yeah.
So for me, this was, again, my feelings about Latin America. That's deeply rooted in me.
Of course.
So, back in the 1980s, I knew about the Central American plight of Central Americans and would speak out as, not as a veteran at the time, but speak out
And
as
it's
a,
going
as
on
a
today
human
in
rights.
Central America.
That's right. It's still going on. From those days is what's continuing to happen. So what happened is I get a call. I start hearing stuff about, Venezuela, the Maduro government is oppressive, the people are starving in the streets, everything is wrong.
That's fake news, isn't it?
Yeah, well, that's the thing. How do we know, So I get a call from Jerry Condon, who happens to be the president of Veterans for Peace. He says the U.S. Peace delegation, U.S. Peace Council, is inviting a number of people to go to Venezuela. Would you like to go? I said, yeah, I'd like to go. I don't have the money to go, so I don't know. So he said, well, we can try and help you out here a little bit. So I said, well, let me run a GoFundMe campaign. So I did a GoFundMe, raised enough money to go. But as I'm going to Venezuela, things happen right off the bat. My flight gets canceled to go to Venezuela. American Airlines canceled the flight.
Yeah.
Because they said, there was a blackout, electrical blackout in there, and they couldn't fly in. Now,
But
I
the
wasn't-
sabotage, huh?
yeah, but at first it wasn't that even. I wasn't believing them, because I heard so much propaganda in my life. So I was supposed to meet Margaret Flowers and Kevin Zeese of Popular Resistance in Miami, and we were gonna. And she had figured out that we could get a flight. We could go to Panama and catch a flight from Panama to Caracas with Copa Airlines. So we went there, bought tickets, and got in there. Now, they were right. The power was out. And Copa Airlines comes in during the daytime, just like it did in the military. by sight, you know. and we get in there, and it was a little bizarre at first because the computers weren't working, nothing was working, so they were using their phones to try and find out what our visas meant, they didn't understand who we were and why we were there, and we met up with another delegate, Miguel Figueroa, who was he's the president of the Canadian Peace Congress. So he was there. None of us spoke Spanish except for Margaret Flowers. So she finally got the message through. She was still having difficulty getting the message through, but they finally that we had people waiting for us, and so we finally get through the airport, and we get into Caracas. And yeah, the power is out, the power is out. It had already been out for 4 days when we got there, and another 2 or 3 days it still went on. Now, what we heard from the U.S., I was still being able to get stuff from my phone on the internet, off and on, was saying that, there was a crisis in Venezuela, right? That people were rising up, that all this chaos was happening. And we're looking out, there's nothing happening.
Who is the guy that's trying to replace Maduro?
That's Juan Guaido. Juan Guaido declared himself president of Venezuela.
And Trump decided that was good.
Yeah, well, the thing is to know that Juan Guaido had just been talking to Pence a few minutes before he declared himself president of the country. And that tell you something.
What's going to happen there? Is that revolution going to succeed?
Well,
the CIA and
I would say
America,
it's succeeded already, but that it's under trouble because you cannot surround a nation with economic embargo.
Yeah.
Stop freeze all their bank accounts. Basically hold their ships hostage, their oil ships, so that they can't even ship their oil to other countries for sale. And Venezuela, for a long time, was using oil as its main export.
Yes.
That would and then they would import everything else. So medicine, food, all these things were imported. Now, when you stop that payment, and the oil prices went down, plus you add that to it, people are suffering.
Oh, yes.
So you have people suffering in the country. But like in many disasters that happen around the world, what happens when that happens, these people didn't rise up. They came together to help each other. And the government had certain programs, one called CLAP, which they had these boxes of food, oil, some cooking utensils, and some basic essentials that people needed, toiletries, etc. And they would hand those out to some 2 million people, one barrio had 2 million people in it that were supporting that continued to support the government.
We have one more comment here. The protection occupation of the Venezuelan embassy.
Well, so, we, I should say, I had a chance to meet Maduro.
Did you?
Yeah, so
Oh, man.
when they canceled my flight leaving, Maduro invited all of us to an audience with him. So we had a chance to speak with Maduro.
Man.
And what I did too, I should just say, I don't know if you can hear this, I don't want to change your mic too much, but I usually carry my dog tags with me. One is my Vietnam dog tag, military, and a Veterans for Peace. So Maduro was giving us a gift, and I said to him, I took this one off of my chain, and I handed him this, and I says, this one is, my Vietnam is to remind me of a time I went to war that I should never have been in. This is Veterans for Peace dog tag, and on the back of it, it says, dedicated to the abolishment of war. I want to give this to you, hoping that war does not occur. And I gave it to him, he put it on, and later he came out in a press conference and put me beside him with other people around and said, this is my good luck charm, basically, something of that nature. So, hand in hand, we finally leave Venezuela into the hands of the Venezuelan people, and who I trust explicitly in trying to maintain the revolution. While at the same time, you know, the embassy in Washington, D.C. is basically being occupied by activists who call themselves the Embassy Protection Collective.
Yeah, the right-wingers.
Yeah. Well, no, these were activists.
Okay.
Okay. So the right-wingers would surround it, would
Yeah.
take over, and what happened is the U.S. Guaido sends I forget the guy's name. This guy to be the embassy, the ambassador, because what happened, the U.S. Pulled their ambassadors out of Venezuela. They said Venezuelan ambassadors had to leave the country, but it's still considered, property of Venezuela.
Yeah.
So as an embassy, it's protected under all kinds of law. So they gave the keys to these activists to protect it. So what were they doing? They were holding classes on Africa. They were doing teach-ins. They would use it as a meeting place, and so the D.C. police, the Secret Service, and these right-wing, what we call opposition supporters of Guaido, were trying to take over the embassy. They tried to break in. They threatened people. They used racist language. They used violence. And even my president, Jerry Condon, who was with me in Venezuela, went there to be a person on the outside because the police set up a barricade with these right-wingers, and so they couldn't get food. They were trying to starve them
We're
out.
going to have you back again pretty soon because there's so much more to the story, and you're so full of exciting stories. And I wonder what keeps your heart going. And it's time for us to stop now, so it's time for public service announcements. God, what a wonderful experience. Thanks for watching. Remember KFC, not Kentucky Fried Chicken, Dr. Don's KFC. Be kind.
Tell them where we're going to be
friendly,
have another event.
and charitable. And pretty soon we'll be having you on again, okay? Okay, thanks again, man. You're just delightful.
Yeah.